In 2022, it was announced that previous showrunner Russell T Davies would be returning to Doctor Who with his previous creative team. The lead up to this run left much anticipation, especially with casting announcements coming in. For the main cast, Ncuti Gatwa of Sex Education fame would take on the Doctor, and Millie Gibson from Coronation Street as companion Ruby Sunday. The Christmas special The Church on Ruby Road would serve as the 15th Doctor's first story, featuring a whimsical tone alongside mischievous goblins. However, Space Babies would be the first episode of the new season. For many people, there was a lot riding on Space Babies. We'd had a taste of the new era's tone in the Christmas special, but the pilot is really the official start, preparing us for a whole new season of adventures. We start this story with a quick recap leading into Ruby's first trip in the TARDIS. The Doctor's enthusiasm glares, accompanied by some basic exposition on his Gallifreyan origin. A little bit of background exposition for new viewers, essentially introducing Doctor Who's basics. Performance-wise, Ruby Sunday has some slightly exaggerated reactions, but I think it works well to bounce off of Ncuti's presence. When the Doctor smiles as he says his planet is gone, you get the feeling he's moved on from that, ready for new adventures. Really, the episode wastes little time in getting on with things, which is good. I loved how triumphantly the event of a TARDIS's materialisation was, something that has been missing lately but is pretty key to the show. Colourful lights, magical music, and gravity-defying stunts all feel invigorating as an intro. As it stands, this intro is an extremely strong start, but things start to go downhill when Russell T Davies reuses old cues. For example, the scene where Ruby watches Earth should be a special moment for fans, but it's undermined with repetitive dialogue. The showrunner basically word for word repeats gimmicks from The End of the World, such as a companion being able to call her mother and being shocked that she's still alive. This was pretty disappointing and lazy from Russell T Davies, however, the episode eventually becomes its own thing. A new episode that draws from Partners in Crime and of course The End of the World. The result is a bit of a weak outing, but despite this, the character chemistry shines. Though the plot is a little hard to take seriously, the episode absolutely nails a dazzling dynamic between the Doctor and Ruby, something that I feel has been missing for the show in ages. Chibnall-era companions were very flat, and even Moffat to an extent, but with Ruby and the Doctor, we seem to be back to a platonic friendship that just works really nicely. In my opinion, Ruby Sunday is a weaker companion than, say, Rose or Donna, but her chemistry with Gatwa is electric. Russell has never had a problem writing the Doctor, and that's clear in 15. The Doctor's declaration that he goes on for others is a heartwarming scene excellently delivered by Gatwa, a small moment that epitomises the Doctor. Interestingly, the 15th Doctor is a more vulnerable incarnation, giving him a fresh side from those that came before him. It's a small detail that distinguishes him from others, giving this Doctor a relatability so early on. It's also interesting to see the typical dynamic switched, with Ruby beckoning on the Doctor, their friendship giving him the courage to go forwards. Much of the fun in this story comes from acclimating to their dynamic. Ruby feels like an active character, bouncing off questions and involving herself in situations. Sometimes these questions felt like they interfered with us learning about her as a person, however. It says a lot that Ruby runs into danger with ease, later putting her life on the line for baby Eric without concern. These haphazard actions quickly build up an outline of the character and her moral core. One of the stronger elements to this story was the mystery that was further touched upon. Russell is known for his big arcs like Bad Wolf or Harold Saxon, and Ruby is clearly cut from the same cloth. When reflecting on Ruby Road, snow suddenly appears like magic, something that will be later elaborated on. These threads are great for building audience intrigue when individual stories aren't as engrossing, encouraging you to keep up with a show. Some shows overplay this element, but I've always thought Russell adds just the perfect amount. Things start to go downhill when a baby arrives out of the blue. It's no secret that the Doctor encounters babies operating this space station, which is very childish. The idea of a baby farm or of a younger cast isolated on a station has lots of potential, but the juvenile humour and two-dimensional plot really prevents this from developing. There are some really interesting ideas that are untouched in favour of silly humour, featuring uncanny CGI touch-ups. The idea just feels very gimmicky, not quite enough to substantiate a Doctor Who episode. I think it was a good idea to show the Doctor and Ruby's empathy towards these little ones. The babies themselves draw into Ruby's adopted origins naturally, and the Doctor's intrigue at humanity, but those sweet scenes aren't enough to prop up a plot. It turns out these babies are needy for a parental figure, and it's clear Russell is interweaving political statements, perhaps about parental or government neglect, something I was happy to see touched on. It could really be about any individual in need of care or a proper home, but this is hard to take seriously given the episode's overall tone. Despite this, the abortion metaphor was handled fairly well. Nonetheless, there's a lot of wasted potential. The creepy creature lurking in the shadows suffers a similar fate, revealed to be a monster made out of literal bogies. It coincides with the silly tone, but feels very unnecessary. The bogeyman's existence was nonsensical, going a bit too far for my taste. It's a shame, because there was some nice creepy cinematography going on before that anti-climax of a reveal. It had a vibe similar to Aliens before we found out it was made of bogies. The Doctor and companion quickly figure things out, and it never really feels like anything difficult is thrown at them. Even the episode's resolution to power the station with a huge fart just really reeks of DX Machina. It's easy to forget that Russell T Davies has a very juvenile sense of humour. He can cook up scathing political commentaries, but he's also known for fart humour and dance sequences. He's always injected a childish energy into the series, but I think this went a little too far in this episode. Overall, this episode was underwhelming as a season opener. Don't get me wrong, the episode isn't terrible, but as an opener attempting to attract viewers, I don't think it excels. Especially since Russell T Davies had repeatedly said that this season is a soft reboot of the show attempting to capture a wider audience, and a lot of people would probably find this first episode underwhelming or simplistic in plot. This pilot was pretty important for viewers to stick with the show, so it being a bit more complex would have been appreciated. I found the bogeyman concept more interesting than the babies, so it's a shame it was so underdeveloped. I think this episode could have been really strong had it been Alien-esque, with the bogeyman as an intimidating creature that scares the babies. Then you could still have that silly tone with the babies, but the scary stuff would just make it more high stakes and interesting. Though heavily flawed, there's a certain charisma in Russell's scripts that pulls through weaker stories, and the Doctor's infectious energy certainly helped. This episode wasn't amazing, but it was good escapism. Importantly, I felt invested in the characters, which is most important. After Space Babies, safe to say the Devil's Chord is far stronger. The Devil's Chord seemed to be an all-out musical from the trailer, so I was interested to see Doctor Who pull this off. Music is such a huge part of what makes Doctor Who work, and there was lots of hype surrounding the Beatles. The opening is suitably slow as we're taken to London, opening on musical chords being played. The performances here are very good, building up to the mysterious Devil's Chord. This is Doctor Who, so when this chord is played there's no question it will bring about chaos, and that chaos comes in the form of Jinx Monsoon as the Maestro, a relative of the Toymaker that feeds upon music. The episode feels very classic Doctor Who historical, but it's given a whole new lease of life when Maestro pops up in utter camp, bringing a pantomime quality to the story. Some people will find Maestro's threat difficult to take seriously given such a goofy presence, but I love that Doctor Who is taking these kinds of big swings. The show could easily churn out a repetitive historical where we get to follow the Beatles, but instead it's refreshing. This kind of episode format is one we've seen many times before, but it's different by adding such a high energy character. A lot of people are divided on Monsoon's portrayal, and though I was cautious, I think it works to make this episode a whole lot of fun. Evil cackles and gleeful smiles feel very entertaining, and I do love a good pantomime performance. Jinx is clearly loving getting to play such a scenery-chewing character, and this kind of villain really expands upon the events the Toymaker set into place. I feel like Monsoon was perfectly cast as this melodramatic character. This camp performance does feel like the family of the Toymaker, and that's what the show's going for. Whether you like the character, there's no doubt that it feels things are building up with each episode, previous stories rewarding the viewer for having watched. Maestro refreshes the episode because I don't think going back to the Beatles feels very fresh, despite the Beatles being iconic. Going back there feels pretty generic for a wide audience, however the musical element and the Maestro really elevated the episode. Fitted out in 1963 garb, the Doctor and Ruby land in the swinging 60s at the famous Abbey Road studios. The Doctor and Ruby soon realise the timeline has been altered, listening to some terrible music from the Beatles. Apparently, this idea was to get around playing actual Beatles songs, which would prove too expensive. And though it's a little disappointing to see the mopheads bust out a bad tune, I like the way Maestro's actions directly affect the tunes. Even affecting something small like music serves to inform a change in the mood on planet Earth. Music is a hugely freeing art form, so it makes sense that a lack of good tunes would change things for the worse on a cultural and mental level. The episode had some opportunities to make some humorously bad songs, but the ones we get feel very half-baked from Russell, which makes sense because it's supposed to be bad, but it would have been fun to inject some future ties or hilarious wordplay in there. The Beatles actors themselves do well with what they've got to work with, but they don't end up being a huge part of the episode. They are integral to the story, but as characters they don't get time to shine. This is hugely unusual for a historical episode, as they would typically be front and centre, but that's where Maestro takes the cake. The episode does have some nice character moments in between confrontations with Maestro. The Doctor reflecting on his past as the First Doctor and his granddaughter Susan is really sweet. Something about this felt very intentional, as Susan became family to the Doctor, and I feel like it might tie into Ruby Sunday, or one of the larger mysteries at play. Thematically, it ties into his history as a timeless child, which he discussed in the previous episode. It's an interesting choice to have these kinds of name drops to the Timeless Child and Susan, despite the show trying to soft reboot for new fans, but I'll always appreciate it acknowledging its history as long as it doesn't become too reverential or repetitive. Ruby Sunday herself proves her musical skills on the piano, a beautifully sad waltz from Murray Gold that seems to be important to Ruby's character. Despite Ruby's outgoing nature, this musical piece implies that there's some kind of sadness deep down, and the Maestro's claim that Ruby has a song deep within furthers her mysterious aspect. This scene was one of my favourites within the episode. It's very simple, Ruby playing this somber piece for people nearby to be reminded how beautiful music can be, enjoying its calming quality before Maestro strikes again. In contrast to that piece, the show conveys its range with an atmospheric silent sequence, something that only makes Maestro even more compelling as a character. Removing the sound from a character so loud was an interesting change of pace, and I think it really added to the scene's tension. To see the Doctor run from Maestro continues on the Doctor's fear from space babies, conveying how much the Toymaker has wounded the character. I love that the show is sticking to an arc and having the Toymaker unleash a whole new side to the Doctor Who universe. It's serialising the show through new villains in a very interesting way. I imagine for a couple of seasons we'll look back on this as the fantasy era of Doctor Who, which feels very distinct. Back to the episode, the stakes are really brought home when the Doctor decides to go forwards in time to showcase the destruction Maestro's meddling could cause. This scene did perhaps interrupt the flow of the story, but it did continue to offer good character scenes for the Doctor and Ruby. and it made people unfazed by Maestro understand why they must be stopped at all costs. Moments of genuine fear between the Doctor and Ruby are fantastic, feeling very different for the Doctor to showcase. It really makes the episode easier to take seriously when it causes this emotion in our characters. We are so used to seeing the Doctor so cocky that having him be out of his element is a great move. Notably, the musical standoff between the Doctor and Maestro was pretty creative, even if it could have went further. I think that Maestro proves Doctor Who can go all out camp as long as it retains emotional core and stakes. Though I can like musicals, I think I liked that this episode wasn't one. It's an episode that has an appreciation for music with instrument sequences, but the characters don't all bust out into song. Well, apart from the end. Overall, I thought this was a very entertaining episode. However, the way that Maestro is banished felt very underwhelming, as the Doctor plays a bland chord that we get no explanation for him knowing. Furthermore, the end musical sequence felt tacked on, although it did highlight celebration in light of music being restored. For the next episode, we get Boom, written by prior showrunner Stephen Moffat. Lots of Moffat stories have extravagant plots that linger on details and mystery, however, Boom proves to be a stripped back outing from the former showrunner. The central idea of revolving an episode around the Doctor having stepped in a landmine is very creative. I think the episode shows how restrained Moffat can be, having the whole episode set in one small location, simply focusing on the tension that arises. I think Moffat's episode comes in at just the right time, as RTD and Moffat excel at opposing elements. RTD is more of a character writer, whereas Moffat is more of a plot genius. Boom was a much needed breakup from RTD's fluffy stories. I enjoyed the previous episodes a lot, but Boom proves why writers' rooms need variety, as one creative vision can become repetitive. The opening itself is slow, immersing you into a dystopian world where soldiers tread lightly across war-torn surfaces, avoiding explosive fates and deadly ambulance services. A sense of camaraderie and seriousness is quickly cemented, as two soldiers band together throughout this intro. The episode proves to be great, combining many Moffatisms such as AI, soldiers, and a tight sci-fi narrative. However, there are some character issues. Much of the episode's emotional core hinges on a soldier we meet at the start. However, he doesn't get enough depth to feel impactful. The show attempts to create impact with some quick interactions with his daughter, but these are very brief before his death. Notably, Moffat provides fantastic dialogue for the Doctor and Ruby, but I found the soldiers a little bland. Said soldier is exterminated for being blind by an AI ambulance, diagnosed as unfit to work. The character pleads for his life, but is brutally dispensed of. This would have been a lot more impactful had he been given more depth. In the soldier's place, a hologram now imitates the character, becoming a spokesperson for the dead that retains some basic personality traits. The idea is chilling, with similar concepts explored in prior Moffat scripts. After this basic setup and introduction to the state of the world, there's a welcome change of tone with the Doctor entering the picture. As 15 radiates and his triumphant theme swells, the show reminds you there's always hope. The Doctor's quick on his feet to investigate the scene, but this gets him into trouble when he lands on a landmine, setting up the central conceit for the episode. Likely inspired by Genesis of the Daleks, the idea itself is very simple, but well executed. Moffat's had many scripts in the past that are overcomplicated, serving as a vehicle to show how smart he is at mysteries, and so on. So this basic premise, executed well, felt refreshing. In a lot of ways, this script felt like a Capaldi episode, and at times Moffat gave in shitty lines that Capaldi would have said. However, RTD did have similar issues earlier in the season. Unintentionally, the return of these old writers has shown some repetition of their prior eras, but I think it's also highlighted their strengths after a long gap writing the show. For Moffat, this episode is a no strings attached deal. There's no mystery to wrap your head around, just a tense sci-fi plot with some great moments between the Doctor and Ruby. Previously, the 15th Doctor has shown some fear, so his calm state given this situation felt varied. Gatwa gets some incredible moments of doctory dialogue. He goes through so much on this landmine that just allows the Doctor to express so much. Gatwa is allowed to show his range after playing a more upbeat Doctor, as here he's on high alert. The plot allows him to showcase genuine fear, concern, rationality, and wit, jumping back and forth in a way that's just so effortlessly the Doctor. In an episode where the Doctor's movements are largely stagnant, his personality is very much the opposite, perhaps compensating for his situation. I often think the Doctor covers his worries with humour and sarcasm, and that's definitely true of this outing. Beyond the emotional core between Ruby and the Doctor trying to navigate their tense situation, things become more uncomfortable when Splice turns up, the daughter of said deceased soldier. Confronted with the AI rendition of her father, she believes him to be still alive. We don't get to know the characters enough to make this payoff heartbreaking, but it is nonetheless sad, highlighting the dangers of emotional manipulation when technology can imitate human beings. Despite not being wholly original, Moffat's commentary is well defined and handled. I think his allegories are very with the times and his critiques woven well into the narrative. As for Splice herself, I think she's the worst character of the episode. Her lines are overly childish for a character her age, and she feels very one note. I understand the character was meant to continue that emotional core, but she began to feel redundant as the episode continued. I also understand the episode was trying to showcase how horrible war is for families, but a little variety and further fleshing out of character would have went a long way. For much of the episode, Mundy and Splice stand around when they could have been interacting with their loved ones at base camp. This would have depicted the soldier experience really well, getting to know someone dearly, so that when they did die nearer the end of the episode, we would care more for the characters. The episode was more focused on the AI critique over the emotion, so that's prioritised. I just think more scenes together would have lended itself to better character work. In the end, the Doctor's appeal to humanity overrides the AI, but the message is still very clear. We end on a very uplifting note as the Doctor celebrates his genius, later soaking up the stellar views of Castarian Free. It's hoped that war will end given the Doctor's breakthrough, and that AI use will be limited in future. Like Russell, Moffat can't help but repeat himself in a few areas. Some are reverential, like fish fingers and custard, however, others take the form of the militaristic setting and the landmine, both previously seen in Moffat's episodes. Notably, the show's visuals remain on point. The misty backdrop and dynamic lighting looks really impressive, aided by a magnificent in-studio crater set and LED wall. Orange lighting and fire really makes this planet vibrant, with a serious air of danger. In the old days, Doctor Who would simply film in a quarry with no impressive effects, but this episode showcases how far the show has come on a budgetary level. Overall, Boom is a very good episode that doesn't really waste any time, giving the Doctor a lot to work with. A heavier ordeal was definitely needed somewhere down the line, and on that note, Moffat definitely delivered. Though not his best work, this was an excellent episode. For those that thought the first two were too campy, this one has drama in spades. A simplistic, yet well executed story. 73 Yards is a fantastic showcase for Millie Gibson as Ruby Sunday, a Doctor-Light episode reminiscent of Turn Left with inspiration from Black Mirror and folk tales. The episode opens with a reverential look at the Welsh countryside from Welshman Russell T Davies. The rural landscape lends itself to some nice cinematography, with the TARDIS dotted near the edge of a cliff top. The Doctor and Ruby have a brief conversation in their ongoing adventures, but the episode quickly gets to the point, as the Doctor accidentally breaks a mysterious circle of cotton and skulls. After breaking this supernatural symbol, a new timeline begins to diverge, with the Doctor missing. From here, the episode diverges on a mysterious path, as a vague figure begins to follow Ruby wherever she goes, always distant 73 yards, like a guardian or villainous figure. This stalker-esque concept is great in its simplicity, and I like the way it intertwined with the show's supernatural leaning. This woman naturally catches Ruby off guard, and it would be unsettling for such a character to always be so close without rhyme or reason, never able to get close to understand the character's reason for being or intention. Anyone who gets close quickly runs in fear. Another interesting concept. The pub sequence is by far my favourite of the episode. Not long after the Doctor goes missing, Ruby stumbles upon a small pub. Ruby's anxiety rises carefully as she worries just what supernatural situation she's found herself in. Initially, the odd performances and animosity from the locals seems to be some form of possession linked to the woman outside. Dutch angles and close-ups accentuate the tension, showcasing Doctor Who at its best. Such scenes felt reminiscent of Midnight, but this is all soon pulled away when we realise the locals were simply teasing Ruby, with no otherworldly element present. It's meant to be a plot twist, but I just found it disappointing. I feel like had the episode solely been set in the pub with such horror, it could have been a masterpiece, but instead it becomes a jangled montage of Ruby's life and feels like too many plot threads are involved for its own good. An episode solely set in the pub would have highlighted that limited set pieces and tight narratives create excellent stories. Instead, the story juggles too much and is loose and untidy. 73 Yards' main problem is in how much the story has to juggle. We begin with an intriguing premise, a mysterious pursuer lingering as Ruby resides in a claustrophobic pub, spooked by horror stories and teasing locals. The vibes the episode pulls off are immaculate, but later trying too much and a lack of logical explanations become the episode's downfall. Later in the episode we see Unit. I love to see the return of Kate Stewart here, as Unit returning to Doctor Who just continues to build out the Whoniverse, and Kate Stewart is such a warm, James Bond-esque character that's nice to see. However, when we don't really find out what the vague woman says, it really frustrated me as a viewer. I think the idea of people turning on Ruby, who was seemingly abandoned by her real mother, is great emotional drama, but there's little time to highlight despair given how much is jam-packed into the episode. Ruby meets someone friendly, and like dominoes they leave her one by one because of this woman. To see familiar characters like Kate Stewart and Carla turn on Ruby is chilling. However, the short seasons of this era means much of the relationship is implied over us having seen it. The episodes of Doctor Who might have bigger budgets than before, but I sorely miss the 13 episode long seasons of the early 2000s. It would have added a lot to this episode. I feel this episode overcomplicates a simple premise. The episode just tries to do too much. Roger Williams might be a scathing stab at current politics, but he only gets about 10 minutes of screen time and isn't a very interesting character. Russell has explored this political kind of story far better in his show Years and Years, so this repetition is not appreciated. That show was tightly focused on its narrative, following a struggling family sticking together as years of political instability and dystopian shenanigans occur. The show had 6 hours to tell its narrative and build its characters, whereas Roger feels like a shallow repeat of that idea with far less interesting qualities. If you've watched both shows, it feels disappointing. RTD is retreading old ground, but doing it infinitely worse than its original form. Similar to The Pub, if the episode had completely focused on this political narrative, maybe I'd be more forgiving. But as it stands, it feels shoehorned into what should be Ruby's story. The episode tries to paint Ruby finally taking down Williams as a triumphant moment. But it's hard to find that satisfying when you've barely developed that plot thread. The character is a political stereotype at best. Though I appreciate the mockery, it doesn't exactly make for an entertaining story here like in Years and Years. Darker thematics such as abuse are implied, but just skipped over immediately. Essentially, the two ideas of horror story and political allegory just don't mesh together well, meaning you get less from each subplot instead of one focused, fuller narrative. Often mysteries rely on how satisfying the payoff is, when we can understand and trace back the clues. It's immensely rewarding when that's the case. This episode really shoots itself in the foot by explaining so little. It's an episode that felt like it went for the ideas before figuring out how to explain them, something that really irritated me. It's easy to create an interesting story when you have no idea why any of it happens or how it all works, and RTD clearly decided to go for a story without caring for explanations. With the supernatural presence, it allows for interesting new characters, but to use it to cover over flaws isn't a good look. Having none of the conjured questions be answered at the end just marks a disappointing note to end on. The episode itself is good, but has some clear problems. 73 Yards repeats themes of Turn Left and Years, but is hampered by logical jumps and a jangled narrative. The tone and vibes of this episode are pulled off really well, but I feel the episode loses focus later, and too many plot threads that just don't pull together. From the cheery music and pastel colours, you would be forgiven for believing Dot and Bubble would be a friendly, silly story. It's only with a sombre ending that the rug is pulled from under us, and we see what protagonist Lundy is really made of. The episode lures you into a false sense of security with an overtly light tone until we discover the privilege that defines the central characters. The self-superiority complex that dominates their personas. Russell T Davies claimed that this episode was inspired by Black Mirror, and this episode does feel very much like a Doctor Who twist on Black Mirror from the start. Fine Time is a world literally shielded by a bubble, everyone within their own social media echo chambers. It's a disturbing reality where status is defined by follower count and fashion trends. Everyone talking in a sugar-coated manner. The whole world is tidy to a fault, but also very hollow. The lack of furnishings probably come down to the emphasis placed on social media, leaving reality behind to scroll through videos, like on TikTok. In Fine Time, everyone's positive to their friends to a toxic level. Cooper Mercy says, "You look so good, baby," at one point, an over-sanitized way of talking where everything's perfect and nobody makes mistakes, and this can refer to toxic fandom or something deeper. If everything said is uncannily positive, it wouldn't be quite right, and for the most part that's Lundy's world. All her opinions are reinforced by fashionable clones online. They all tell her she looks good, never challenging anything she says or doing something different. In following trends, nobody sticks out. They all wear similar fashion like mindless robots. I think it's important to be somewhere in between complete honesty and falsified positivity, because either side can be detrimental. The episode does paint social media as an escape, however, as it can be. Sometimes social media can feel so much more positive and reassuring than your reality, depending on many factors. We see Lindy scroll through her friends list, taking in all the positivity. However, as soon as Gothic Paul says people are disappearing, he's quickly dismissed by Lindy for bringing down the mood, much like the Doctor and Ruby later. Importantly, Gothic Paul is different in the fact that he's 1. A goth, and 2. Has a low follower count. It just shows how pathetic Lindy is that she only buys into things she wants to hear, dismissing anyone who doesn't live up to her expectant standards. Paul tries to alert people of real danger, but these people are so self-absorbed that he's swiped away in an instant. This episode does prove to be over the top. The people of Find Time need directions when walking, a sign of how disconnected from independence they are, resorting to their social sphere for basically anything, a constant voice in their heads. It makes you wonder what the point in having such a nice living space is if you're always going to block it with social media. Notably, this episode shows a lot over telling and implies even more. It's clearly detracting social media use, but not exactly in the most terrifying way or with much overall depth. It's an episode that feels very current and digs into a lot. I was never tired of the episode despite how much of it lacks in frenetic pacing. Watching an episode where the protagonist is looking at a screen sounds rather dull, but the episode constantly had me hooked. A credit to the writing and acting. It's really crazy that someone as wonderful and genius as the Doctor can just be tapped away through the power of social media. Lindy shows such a dismissive attitude when the Doctor tries to get her attention. The way he's tapped away just shows the power of social media and how damaging it can be. Voices actually trying to say something of importance are just dismissed in an instant in favour of a mindless dance sequence. Despite her terrible qualities, I'm not sure I love how helpless Lindy was shown to be. Ricky September is shown to be far more capable, but he turns out to be an avid bookworm able to disconnect. Basically, the episode equates social media with helplessness. The character heroically saves Lundy from certain doom, acting like someone who feels like the Doctor. In his brief scenes, Ricky is far more likable and charismatic than Lindy. It makes it all the more brutal when Lindy sacrifices Ricky to give herself time, killing Ricky in an instant after seemingly being in love with the character. It just shows how manipulative and selfish Lindy is, changing on a dime to suit her interests. That moment is really where the episode cements Lindy's true nature, leading into that dramatic end scene with the Doctor. If you didn't get on board with the episode to this point, I think the ending nails its message. As the Doctor tries to save Lindy, she and her pals refuse, disgusted by the Doctor. It's a clever contrast. Lindy happily went with the white-coded hero who was written like the Doctor, but refuses 15 for being a black man. Her disgust is uncomfortable to watch, but it does give 15 a great scene of breakdown. Despite the ugliness, the Doctor is open to saving these bigoted characters, seeing an opportunity for goodwill in even the worst situations. His complete compassion is a huge juxtaposition from Lindy and her friends, characters whose self-supremacy will lead to their own deaths. The episode has shown them to be social media fanatics, but this scene compounds how blind they truly are, putting up needless barriers. The social media commentary on the younger generation could have felt a bit haphazard from an older show, tempting to appeal to a younger audience. How successful the commentary proves is really open to opinion. For me, the episode worked well, with a strong thematic at the end. But I do think the main plot could have held more nuance. The episode was trying to oppose the addiction to social media. However, it largely painted social media as detrimental, when lots of creativity and good can come out of these platforms. It's true that social media is a vast construct that can be toxic and addictive, but there are also benefits. Some people meet their partner through social apps. Friendly communities can be cultivated, such as Doctor Who Twitter, sharing memes and enjoying fan speculation. There are plenty of harmless social spheres out there. Social media will naturally cultivate negative qualities when people stick with the wrong social communities or start to believe their own opinion supreme. Rogue was the episode I was least excited for. It seemed like a safe story outright. I dislike that historicals only go so far back, and I've never delved into shows like Bridgerton. However, I can safely say the episode was a highlight. There's a level of heightened mockery in this story. The Doctor and Rogue have an earnest dynamic, but the villains and characters feel like they're winking to the audience. This episode was claimed to be a riff on Bridgerton, and the dialogue is clearly heightened for drama and fun over something more serious. It's definitely a feel-good episode over the last entry's darker turn, but it still has some gut punches. Thanks to the relationship that develops between the Doctor and Rogue, the episode nails it on the emotional front. Many Doctor Who fans aren't a fan of the Doctor having human qualities, and as such, loads of fans dislike whenever the Doctor falls in love. On some level, I understand it. The Doctor's love for Rose was toxic, and Martha's crush on the Doctor was unhealthy. On the other hand, River Song was a good match, but that relationship was doomed anyway. Basically, the Doctor doesn't have a good track record in this department, and there's even more danger of that loss with romance. I can see criticisms towards the episode feeling too standard, however. It's an episode that definitely plays it safe, with a historical period we've seen before and surface level villains that play for laughs. Never in the episode was I intrigued by the Chowder or their motivations, so your mileage really depends on the growing flirtation present. If you don't buy the chemistry or like this kind of thing, you probably won't like the episode. Thankfully, I bought into such a dynamic. As it stands, their chemistry was really sweet, and it was good to see the Doctor fully unwind. The Doctor is hundreds of years old at this point, and this incarnation is no stranger to flirting. From an atmosphere standpoint, the episode nails a certain light-hearted tone. The episode plays into the fanciness of high society England. There's luxurious dancing and romantic spiffs. It's very much a glamorized view of the past created solely for fun, and I think that's okay. Seeing the Doctor and Ruby enjoying dancing together is pretty sweet, enjoying an element of this era that's different to every day. There are some humorous moments, such as Ruby not quite fitting into regal society. She's very much a northern girl of the 2020s, and some of the posh language and flavour doesn't come naturally. I actually thought this was really fun, and personally think that the overly flamboyant language felt a bit high and mighty. There's no real criticism towards British past or royal snobbery present, but we know Ruby's stance. Sure, she's enjoying the moment, but I'm pretty sure she wouldn't want to be stuck here for too long, enjoying royal pleasure for thrills before the two are off on their next adventure. In regards to the Chowder, they do have some nice moments. The opening disguise scene conveys a level of threat, a classic Doctor Who opening to title sequence, but balancing their threat level and focusing on the Doctor and Rogue is too much for one story, so they do feel a little lackluster. A highlight of the Chowder was Indira Varma. Varma was excellent as the Chowder, previously having played Susie in Torchwood. She's been in other shows like Game of Thrones, and she knows just how to tap into the melodrama of her character. A pretty great performance that was a highlight of the episode for me. As for the Chowder villains taking on the appearance of others, it's a bit standard. We already have villains who can do that like Zygons, and they've had some excellent stories because of that ability. It would have been excellent to see the Zygons return, but unfortunately that's not the case. The Children aren't bad villains per se, they don't fall to the levels of Slovene or maybe Santarans, but there's a lot of untapped potential. There's little weight in shapeshifters as characters if they turn into people we don't know in the first place, and their bird-face makeup felt rather uninspired. I think it's very human to take a creature that's supposed to be from another world and give them features we see in animals. It shows a limit in creative thinking. I didn't like it in the cat people, and I'm not a fan of it here. Unless the children return in a stellar show of threat, the Zygons are the far better villain. It's definitely an inspired choice to lack returning villains because some of the newer villains have felt a little forgettable, with some episodes not even having a villain at all. The motivations for the children are bafflingly slim. They want to roleplay the political world, take on powerful figures for fun, and just ruin everything as time goes on. It's a little hard to take seriously that they aren't driven towards such goals, rather they seem bored, doing it to keep spirits high and reveling in the roleplay. This, combined with a lack of drama outside of the Doctor, makes the episode feel a little sanitized. As far as RTD's companions go, Ruby isn't nearly as complex, almost defined by her mystery with limited family interactions. I still like the character a lot, but it's definitely something lost with such short seasons. It's really important how much we care about the companion or eyes into the show, and 8 episodes simply doesn't feel long enough. Ruby has a nice companion to character moment, but I didn't nearly buy into it as I have before, and it felt at odds with the other stuff going on in the story. I feel like Ruby gets shortchanged in this episode. She very much feels like a bystander. I'm sure Bridgerton fans would soak up all the drama she gets involved in, but for me, it didn't hit the mark. Despite this, Ruby's time consoling a character seemed really earnest, so when it's undercut as we realise the character was a childer the whole time, it worsened those scenes in hindsight, because we know Ruby was with a childer. It's supposed to act as a double twist, but it didn't really work for me and it undercut for chatting scenes. The reveal also tricks you into thinking Ruby had died, which seems like a ridiculous move. These scenes are such a waste of time because we all know Ruby isn't going to have died with 2 episodes left in the season. I would actually respect that move because it would have genuine repercussions, but it's obviously not the case. The brief time spent trying to disguise this feels patronising, and it works even less given Ruby's two-dimensionality. I don't know if this was supposed to be a Bridgerton thing, but it was disappointing. And Ncuti has done an excellent job portraying a more emotionally open Doctor, and this also caters to his flirtation with Rogue. The Doctor has great banter from the start, as he becomes intrigued by this handsome stranger, another traveller observing events. Unlike Captain Jack's dynamic with the Doctor, Rogue is slightly more stoic, with the Doctor encouraging further chatting. The Doctor is quickly taken by this more stoic character, and the two genuinely bond over similar histories, having both lost people. The Doctor is a constant presence of chatter, whereas Rogue is much more to the point. The Doctor is completely ready to open up to someone, but Rogue's more reluctant with recent grief on his mind. He's a lonely character who doesn't have companions and perhaps feels a little less confident in himself. They're two different characters who grow to love each other, going so far as to kiss later. For some, it might be hard to buy a relationship develop so quickly, but it's natural for a new character who's written with this purpose, likely to return in future seasons. Things become more challenging when Rogue believes the Doctor to be responsible for recent deaths, not the Childer. The Doctor ends up getting into a death sentence before wriggling himself out of the situation. It puts the Doctor into a tricky spot, but also gives significant gravitas to his Time Lord reveal, only allowing Rogue to become more interested in the Doctor. Once the two are on the same side, their dynamic can really blossom. The Doctor is proud to show off his TARDIS, his home to Rogue. The Doctor's completely infatuated, wanting to impress him with his own time machine. From this point, Rogue is a lot less stoic. He really frees himself from that time agent persona, being his more casual self. It allows some really amazing scenes. The moment the Doctor and Rogue open up about grief was really the highlight of the episode for me. These two travel time and space, they do amazing things, but loss and grief, they are untouchable to anyone. They've both faced great loss, and it's healthy to reflect on that, to let it out and reminisce the past. The Doctor's brief line regarding Ruby also highlights how important friendship is to mental struggles. When we face difficulties, friends and family pull us through. Through them we heal. Russell seems to have tapped on his own experiences with his husband. This episode was written by Kate Herron and Brian E. Redman, not RTD, but I can see Rogue's partner's death relating to Russell, whose husband sadly passed away. It's a powerful moment of reflection in our characters and a mantra of why to keep going for anyone, to honour those who have passed, for anyone who has lost a loved one. This heart and the emotional storytelling really papered over a lot of my nitpicks of the episode, because at the end of the day, it made me feel a lot. Despite a heightened tone, the grief and love felt genuine. The episode had a lot to say on an emotional level, and that's often most important. Plot issues come and go, but heart is key to any story. The scene is great, and it resonates a lot later when Ruby is seemingly dead and the Doctor loses Rogue. History repeats itself for the Doctor, but as he said earlier, he must go on. We all must go on. The legend of Ruby Sunday had a lot to live up to, the first part of a two-part finale. I have many problems with the second part, but this first part is pitch perfect. The two-part finale has a lot of ground to cover, and the episode comes out of the gate knowing that, reintroducing Unit immediately. The cinematic opening with the TARDIS hurtling into Unit was great spectacle, energising the story before lots of exposition and character drama. In Russell's first era, Unit were used quite often alongside Torchwood, and I love Unit's continued presence in this era. They're the perfect organisation to go against such threats and mysteries, furthering the stakes. Unit expands upon the Doctor Who universe, making it feel more interconnected, and it's nice to see the Doctor with a group of people over going solo. Despite the importance of the Doctor's visit, scenes introducing new characters, shaking hands, and embracing hugs makes Unit feel a lot less sterile. They're a very professional organisation, but such scenes allow the space to feel like a family. Notably, new character Morris Gibbons proved to have a childlike energy I'm fond of in Russell's writing, filling in for Shirley. It's unclear whether we'll continue to see the character, but I think Lenny Rush adds a lot to the role. There is a danger of having too many new characters pop up, so hopefully there will be some consistency to Unit going forwards. Kate Stewart is on form in this story. I think a lot of fans are divided on Kate Stewart as a character. Since introduction, she's been a very formal character given her official position, and some fans believe she lacks development outside of Unit. Though the character is still pretty two-dimensional, I think this episode was her strongest show so far. Like in The Giggle, she can let her guard down, openly hugging the Doctor, a fond friend of her father. Kate really encourages the Doctor to reunite, hoping Susan Twist is actually the Doctor's Susan. With Ruby and the Doctor, it seemed the episode was leading the two central characters to reunite with lost family, and Kate's championing of the joy the Doctor brings really added some introspective into the large narrative. I do find it a bit difficult to wrap my head around the Doctor eager to find Susan again when he just lost Rogue and never bothered to look for him, however. It seems to be a bit inconsistent, but the character was clearly meant to come later. The Doctor's reminiscing of Susan really added a lot to the character's sense of loss. Susan was his first ever companion, a character he's been away from for lifetimes, so I suppose it feels earned he wants to reunite with her once again. It's sometimes tricky to gauge how much the Doctor really cares for his companions. He claims he is fond of them all, acting like best friends for each, but he rarely reflects or goes back for them. The Doctor paints his life as a tragic wanderer, but it's he who allows this by endangering companions. It's he who allows this by moving on in an instant. Every companion's tenure is but a second to the Doctor. It's clearly much more life changing for his companions, acting as a support mechanism for him. After warm intros, the Doctor gets down to business, wanting to find answers to Susan Twist. If you didn't spot it watching this season, Susan Twist has popped up all over time and space since Wild Blue Yonder, with seemingly endless personas. The character follows Russell's classic mystery box storytelling. Watching the season, I was intrigued to see an interesting reveal. Would the character be a Time Lord of some sort, or Susan Foreman, the Doctor's first companion, or perhaps an AI villain tying into prior thematics? Susan Twist, or Triad, seems to be a perfectly normal character. She may be a figure of influence, but she's portrayed as very warm and humble. It's a great juxtaposition, one that lends itself to anticipation of a big transformation, a hidden side to the character. It makes a lot of sense that units were already on the scene, having spotted Susan Twist as a character of influence. As an IT genius, it only seemed to further my thoughts on some AI-related villain, tying into prior episode thematics like Boom and Dot and Bubble. However, this proves to not be the case. Another mystery is Mrs. Flood, who reappears. The episode is already juggling two mysteries, but it complicates things by adding a third in the form of Mrs. Flood. The character had a self-awareness of events in the church in Ruby Road, and ever since speculation around her character has also spiked. Mrs. Flood often speaks directly to camera, sparking theories she could be the god of stories, or some Time Lord hidden in plain sight. Anita Dobson has infused the character with a disarming quirkiness, but it seems to be to put us off the scent of her wisdom. She keeps involving herself into Ruby's life and clearly knows more than meets the eye. It did feel a little artificial the way she entered the episode, but it's not too clunky. When Ruby and family leave Cherry alone, Mrs. Flood quickly transforms into a very different presence. She becomes more intimidating, with an alien tone in her speech. Her knowledge of events only builds up further anticipation regarding Susan. The Doctor is focused on finding out more on Susan, but he also dedicates a good time to helping Ruby. Since the church in Ruby Road, it's been established that Ruby was left by a church, her biological mother a mystery. Wearing a medieval cloak and mysterious aura, the character appeared to be the return of someone big. I had seen some rampant speculation that was exciting, from Ruby's mum being the trickster to another fantasy god. I was curious whether she would turn out to be someone like the God of Memories, explaining the reappearing snow when Ruby remembers. The point is, the character had been depicted as someone significant, and plenty of time had passed to make a reveal more shocking. From an emotional standpoint, the point is obvious. Ruby's adopted in a way like the Doctor was with Gallifrey. Both have a mysterious aspect to their origins, and I wondered whether this would play into a reveal. Perhaps the two were linked through more than their pasts. All exciting theories to keep you curious. Through some advanced technology, UNIT are able to clean up Ruby's VHS tape of the CCTV footage on Christmas. It's a bit hard to believe that something like this can end up looking like this, but this is UNIT we're talking about. The time window is a really cool concept. It's like a primitive version of Star Trek's holodeck. Units have state-of-the-art technology, and it makes sense they'd allow their own means through seeing history, allowing them to stop alien threats just like the Doctor. Just like the Doctor, we have to stay tuned and find out things, observing these characters collaborate to figure it out. The spotlight on teamwork is great, as well as the build-up to answers. The time window is an impressive feat from the show. It's unreliable, bringing the Doctor down to Unit's level for a bit. He's so used to getting what he wants with the flick of his fingers, but this machinery isn't quite so seamless, and he'll just have to put in the work for the answers. It's basically like watching a previous episode, but from a different perspective. The Legend of Ruby Sunday is an episode I can't fault, as its build is excellent. As Susan Triad's pitch approaches, the episode is incredible in its pacing. I genuinely felt the tension as threads came together, and the wonder as Susan's change approached. The regal language from Harriet was fittingly dramatic. Things really become intense in this final stretch. The music swells in epic finale mode, and it seems things are going perfectly. As Sutekh manifests and Susan changes, we're left to wonder, how will the Doctor get out of this one? And what will Sutekh's plan look like? With a huge reveal, we discover the villain is Sutekh. Last seen in 4th Doctor story Pyramid of Mars, Sutekh returns as the God of Death, with a whole new look. I had heard speculation regarding Sutekh, but I had never watched that classic story, and I think his return works conceptually. As Sutekh appears clamped on the TARDIS, it turns out he's planned the ultimate revenge on the Doctor, with Susan Triad a vessel for possession, a follower of his evil. It turns out Sutekh has been clinging to the TARDIS for centuries, ever since that 4th Doctor adventure. Russell made clear that this is an idea he dreamt up as a child after watching the story, and I think the logic shows. Having this evil character have clung to the TARDIS for hundreds of years just to revel in revenge feels a bit pedestrian, and the logistics don't add up given the TARDIS's history. It feels pretty nonsensical, and I think this concept needed further thought. Despite these problems, I will commend the concept. Taking the Doctor's one safe place and rendering it a weakness is fantastic. His blue box of hope is now an altar of destruction. The idea and visuals are great. However, Sutekh's presence falls downhill, as he doesn't get much to do in the second part. The character serves as an outline of a threat, roaring dialogue and controlling characters, but there is nothing beyond that to create depth. The lack of motivation and depth is a huge misstep, especially from Russell T Davies, who said that Pyramids of Mars is one of his favourite stories. He's typically good at scenery-chewing villains, but Sutekh is not one of them. It's one of the many problems that affects the second part of this story. Empire of Death is a very disappointing finale. After a fantastic first chapter of build-up, the resolution is very lackluster. The episode seems to have a checklist of classic finale cliches, quickly ticking these off in a very artificial manner. The stakes are ramped up to impossible levels as units are quickly killed off immediately. Getting to this kind of point so soon feels strange, and having the characters all perish feels shallow. We all know these characters will be magically resurrected, so none of these events are impactful. Not only does it feel like wasted scenery, but it also means we lack that unit team dynamic that was so strong in the first half. Surely bringing in a presence like Sutekh would only further highlight teamwork. Why bring unit into the storytelling if you're going to dispatch of them like this? Not only does Sutekh kill off unit characters, but he also takes command of the TARDIS through Harriet. This is a concept that I adore. The visuals are beautiful as Harriet walks the TARDIS, taking control of the Doctor's vessel. However, it all feels like the wallpaper of a threat, over an actual interesting threat. Taking the TARDIS is a tense moment, granted, but Harriet does absolutely nothing with it. It's a complete waste of dramatic scenery that teases more and gives you nothing. If you're going to do things like that with the TARDIS, have it actually pay off like with the Master. Beyond the great acting, there's just a great deal to nitpick in this story, and these nitpicks combine to create a really damp note of a finale. After episodes of build, Ruby's mum turns out to be surprisingly ordinary, in a very disappointing manner. And Sutekh is defeated through the time vortex, in a laughably bad sequence. The episode is disappointing to say the least. Despite this, the season has had some excellent adventures, and I love the new Doctor. I can only hope that future seasons build on this and become better as we continue. The season brought me a lot of joy each week, and it has felt quite refreshing. Here's to more adventures in time and space. I'd like to give a special thank you to Starfleet Boy, who supports me on Patreon. You can find him at Starfleet Sohail on YouTube and Twitter. If you liked this video, please subscribe and consider joining Patreon. Links are in the description below.